who will be in.
First week of meetings, and this is the symbolic gesture. When committee members go into the room, they check their hats at the door. Even Gene Smith has to check his hat there, that Ohio State lid, and is inside the selection committee room. You know that hat rack? Jeff Long, the former committee chair who's still a member, had that handcrafted in Arkansas just for that special occasion. It's just a little tidbit of information.
That's why you're the host of the show.
You have a lot of money, boy, I'll tell you that.
Reese Davis, Jesse Palmer, Booger McFarland, and Joey Galloway. Kirk Herbstreit and many, many others going to join us in a bit. Paul Feinbaum will be here, Kirby Hocutt, Chris Fowler, all kinds of people with their reaction to these first rankings. What's your biggest question?
I just want to see what they do with Oklahoma and Ohio State. Now, I know it's midseason, and I know it doesn't actually matter because as we move forward, Oklahoma's schedule with Oklahoma State, TCU, and possibly a Big 12 championship will change their resume. But just right off the bat, let's just see how important that head-to-head is. What happened in Columbus with the blowout Oklahoma, great win, but they also suffered a loss later on.
Two teams that have a 0 at the end of their record, Miami and Wisconsin. How do they view that 0? How do they view these teams? Wisconsin and Miami, we look at them a little differently. Miami's kind of hanging on by a thread game after game. Wisconsin really hasn't played anyone. So how does the committee view the 0 at the end of the record?
I'm curious to see where Notre Dame starts out in all of this. I feel like that's been a real hot topic for all of us talking about it the last couple of weeks. Can they make the playoff? And if they win out, and they do, 2 Power 5 champions more than likely left out. Notre Dame's a team whose resume, I think, continues to get stronger, but we've only seen 2 teams play 12 games in a regular season and reach the playoff. Oklahoma did it 2 years ago. Ohio State did it last year. Could Notre Dame be the third?
And all of us are curious about this because, reminder, as is our custom, we don't see the rankings until you do. Only the people who are making sure that the graphic appears on the screen knows what it looks like right now. Kirk Herbstreit is with us. Kirk, same question to you. What are you most interested in seeing with these first rankings?
I agree with Jesse about Notre Dame. I think they're the wild card here, and I can't wait to see what the committee thinks about their only loss up to this point, of course, against Georgia. The other thing is what Joey said is a great point about Ohio State and Oklahoma head-to-head. Oklahoma has that kind of as a trump card. But right now, because of the way not only losing to Iowa State, they hadn't necessarily played their best football over the last 4 weeks. So you wonder if that trend in the direction that they're going may hold them behind Ohio State in the committee's eyes, only to potentially catch up to Ohio State maybe down the road. And the last thing, Reese, is people get really excited and really nervous when the first rankings come out. 2 of the 3 years that we've had the playoffs, teams have come off the beaten path. Ohio State did in 14. Oklahoma did it in 15, where they were way back. Who might be the team this year that could maybe be a little bit off the radar, but still could have a chance to navigate their way and eventually maybe get up there into the top 4?
Yeah.
And we'll talk about all of that. A reminder now of what the selection committee criteria is. Now, this is how they use to rank teams, and it's how they separate teams that they view as comparable. As an example, they obviously didn't view Ohio State and Penn State as comparable last year, but these are things they evaluate to factor into it. Conference championships, nobody has those yet, obviously. Strength of schedule, head-to-head, common opponents. I like the other relevant factors, meaning things that we think are important.
Which uniforms they wore.
Exactly.
Now, it's probably not that. Let's start having a look at some of the rankings right now. We'll start number 25 through 21, the college football playoff rankings brought to you by Allstate. Wazoo hanging in there, Michigan State at 24.
And what about Arizona all of a sudden creeping into 22? Much different team since Khalil Tate has taken over at quarterback. Keep your eye on the Wildcats.
They're now bowl eligible and maybe eligible to take control of the Pac-12 South. What about going in 20 through 16 now? LSU, which has Alabama on Saturday night, and Mississippi State sitting at 16.
I think it's important to look right now. We see LSU is going to be ranked below Auburn, even though LSU beat Auburn. So maybe that's just a glimpse into the committee's mind with this head-to-head thing we're talking about.
We have to factor in 30-point losses and losses to Troy, too. I mean, that has to count doesn't it?
Yeah, but Mississippi State is going to matter also to Georgia and Alabama.
Yeah.
The fact that they're ranked, LSU being ranked. Some of these teams being ranked right now will matter to that resume of the top 4 or 5 teams in the country.
Now, Mississippi State also has a couple of blowout losses on the resume, but those are the only losses that the Bulldogs have. Let's keep climbing through these college football playoff rankings. The first one, looking at the first time. Here are the 2-loss teams, and if memory's serving top of the head, Auburn would be the highest-ranked 2-loss team the lost lead against LSU and the one-possession loss at Clemson, and the Tigers with huge opportunity, I think, in the future with still Georgia and Alabama on the regular season resume, and if things fall right, maybe a second meeting with Georgia.
Yeah, and I keep thinking about what does it matter to Clemson, because their resume will need Auburn on it, and then you think about Georgia gets their shot, Alabama gets their shot, and I keep thinking those two teams, what happens when they beat Auburn? But you're right, what happens if Auburn beats those two teams?
Yeah.
This thing flips.
What about Iowa State all of a sudden climbing into the top 15? This is a very good team, and it was a loss Oklahoma had that at the time seemed very bad. That loss now starting to look a lot better. Big 12, too, tons of parity, guys, and Iowa State could be the team that blows it all up.
No doubt. And what about Virginia Tech having an opportunity, especially if they can continue to win, an opportunity to go against the Clemson to avenge that loss, maybe in an ACC title game? The Hokies look in pretty good shape there at 13.
I think the Hokies are probably that team that Kirk was talking about a minute ago as a potential sleeper because of the opportunities. One more word on Iowa State, Kirk, as we go there, too. Think what would happen if Iowa State had been able to hold on against Iowa. They'd be sitting there with one loss instead. Who is the team you see in that group that is that potential sleeper team that you were talking about?
You alluded to it, and it's just because the opportunity in the games that they still have to play. I mean, everybody wants to talk, especially Chris Felica, the Bear, about these two-loss potential teams at the end, maybe having a shot for this year for the first time, having a shot to get into the 4. How about Auburn? With what they have in front of them, the big game with Georgia that everyone's almost assuming that we're already talking about, okay, Georgia, Alabama, undefeated in Atlanta. What happens if Georgia loses a close game? Auburn's sitting there saying, aren't they come to Jordan-Hare? I mean, we still get to play them, right? So Auburn, if they somehow were able to knock off Georgia and Alabama, sitting there with 2 losses, I think Auburn is still a team that's thinking about trying to surprise some people, and they're definitely in striking distance if they're able to get a couple big wins late in the year.
You know, I think what's funny about all this, too, and when you look at games and we look at wins and losses throughout the entire process of all this, I think you have to lend perspective to games. That's what's really great about the selection committee, in my opinion, looking at all this. For instance, people will look at Alabama right now, way down the road, and say, you know, in terms of a resume standpoint, not probably as strong as some of the other teams that we anticipate being in the top 4, but the win against Florida State week 1 was more impressive than Boston College's win against Florida State this past week, right? And I think that's something that there's so many different factors when we evaluate throughout this course. And we just saw all the different factors that the selection committee is looking at throughout this entire process. It's so much more complex and intricate than the old system in the BCS. And that's one thing that I love about this unique system, with 13 different people taking a look at it every week. It leaves so much out for chance and debate.
You know, the thing, it cracks me up. I hear people all the time say, oh, I want consistency. They didn't like consistency when we had a formula and it just spit out the answer with the BCS.
I like consistency.
Well, there's nothing more consistent than a formula. You didn't like that?
No. I was fine with the formula. I don't like.
I like the humans.
You know what? I like when they act like humans.
Let's get to number 10 here and see who's
not
in
all
the
the time.
Of course. What are you talking about? Miami, one of the few remaining teams in the Power 5 conference, is unbeaten. In fact, we're down to Alabama, Georgia, Miami out of the ACC.
Undefeated team at number 10.
How about that? And Wisconsin still undefeated, too. See where they are. Miami's number 10. Who's at number 9? It is Wisconsin.
Yes.
So now you know what those zeros mean, right?
No doubt. I think the committee has looked at the tape and said, you know what, Wisconsin hasn't played anyone. Miami is squeaking by game by game. They don't value the zeros maybe as much as the two teams do.
Zero's a good thing. You get credit for that, but they're still going to have to prove themselves. Miami's got big opportunities in the next 2 weeks.
Yes, they do.
Got Virginia Tech, got Notre Dame coming up. Wisconsin might have to wait until the Big Ten championship game. We do have Michigan.
And that may be Wisconsin's only point.
Michigan is hurting Wisconsin, to be honest with you. Michigan not being a team that we thought they were going to be is hurting Wisconsin, because as we looked at Wisconsin's schedule, everyone thought, well, they'll have a really good Michigan team later on, and then the Big Ten championship game, and that's no longer there.
Let's look at number 8, just ahead of the Badgers. TCU just suffered its first loss of the season at the hands of Iowa State. So the Horned Frogs, not as damaging as it could have been, perhaps, depending on how things fall in the Big 12, a chance to atone for that loss in a Big 12 championship game if they can get there. They still have a trip to Oklahoma coming up in the next few weeks. At number 7, just ahead of TCU, Penn State let an 18-point lead get away. Now, the big question I think that people have, could the same thing that happened last year happen this year? Team that loses the Ohio State-Penn State game, doesn't get to the Big Ten championship game, still get in the playoff. Penn State needs everybody to lose a bunch in front of them because they don't have a marquee win on the resume.
And they need Michigan State to win, which they just got knocked off by Northwestern. And so that starts to hurt teams like Penn State and their ability to come back from this is when Michigan State loses, when Michigan's not as good as they look, then that resume just starts to get a little shaky.
Herbie, what do you think? Do you like the fact that the committee didn't get stuck on the 0 in the loss column? They've got Wisconsin and Miami at 9 and 10?
I think that's the aspect for a lot of the fans that aren't following it and maybe been privy to the information that we all are. Sometimes gets very confusing. Wait a second, they haven't lost a game. How come they're behind teams with one loss? And I think that's what the entire mission statement of this committee really is. It's not necessarily to just look at the Art Briles way of saying, hey, I'm undefeated, I dare you to keep me out. They're looking at teams that have been challenged and teams that have one loss, and maybe they look at them still being a better team through 8 weeks than a team that has not been tested like a Wisconsin or a Miami. So I applaud the committee for doing that. I think it's, again, confusing and a mixed message for people that don't follow it religiously the way we do. I do want to just touch on one thing about Penn State. All you guys are right. Ohio State had Oklahoma last year as their trump card, the way Oklahoma has it this year. Penn State doesn't have that. They don't have that non-conference win. If you look within the Big Ten and who they still have to play, the best thing that Penn State can do is blow people out. Because if you go by the numbers and you look at the different comparisons, they will lose almost all of those arguments. So the best thing that they can do is blow people out by 40 or 50 points if they can. And just the committee at the end of it, a lot of people lose ahead of them. The committee has to look at each other and just say, Penn State's one of the best 4. The resume doesn't say it, but they're one of the best 4. That's Penn State, in my mind. That's really their only hope at this point.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think really that is the committee's charge, is to get the best 4. Now, being in the first 4 the first week doesn't guarantee you much of anything. No more than 2 have made it in the 3 years of the playoffs. So college football playoff, top 25. Let's go right at the top. I think we know who it's going to be. One of the 2 SEC teams. It is Georgia. Georgia has a better marquee win than Alabama. Let's look at number 2. It's going to be Alabama, right? 2? It is. Yeah. So 1 and 2, Alabama. Register your level of surprise.
Not so surprised because Georgia has a better resume. I think both passed the eye test. Both people blow everybody out. And what I was talking about, perspective wins, when Georgia beat Mississippi State 31-3, that was very impressive. Mississippi State at the time was unbeaten. They had just smashed LSU. So that was all. We talked about the Notre Dame win. That was big. But there are other little wins that I think are feathers in the hats as well.
Well, and not surprised at all. And this tells me that the committee is looking at the tape and watching, because throughout the season, these 2 teams have been the 2 best teams when you turn the tape on, playing game in and game out. They're handling their business.
When
so I
you
like
look at the tape book and say watching, are you telling me when you watch Alabama and Georgia play, you're telling me you think Georgia's a better team than Alabama? I understand resume. I understand that they're not going to give them a lot of credit for beating Alabama. But when I watch these 2 teams play on tape, I do not feel as if Georgia is better than Alabama.
We'll get to that in just a minute. I want to show you number 3. That is exactly as it should be. I could not be in more agreement with the committee with having Notre Dame number 3 with the schedule they played, the wins they have, the 1-point loss to number 1. They deserve to be.
And the way they look right now, the way they looked against USC, the way they looked against NC State, and I had them at number 3 in my own poll. Even though, Reese, I didn't want to give you credit, and I said I was sleeping on them early, they woke me up. And to be honest with you, I don't know how far Wimbush can take them with his arm. He is starting to throw some touchdown passes. I just don't know if he can get him over the top if he has to.
But the style of play that they have, they understand who they are. They have the best offensive line in football, and they run the football. And Wimbush doesn't have to do a lot. He's only going to have to make 2 or 3 key passes a game. And if he does that, Notre Dame has a formula, Joey, they can win.
Are there 3 more physical teams ever in the top 3 than these 3 right here?
Slobber knockers.
You know what? All of that, spread them out. Around them, these 3 teams.
907 drill, downhill.
Let's look at number 4. Who's sitting in 4?
All right.
The Clemson Tigers. Only the loss to Syracuse, the extenuating circumstance of Kelly Bryant being injured. So we have Clemson at number 4. Who's just behind at number 5? Oklahoma. So valuing the head-to-head, so that leaves Ohio State. So the Buckeyes are going to be sitting at number 6. All right, let's look at the comparative stats with Clemson, Oklahoma, and Ohio State in terms of the resume stats. Strength of record is a measure of how well you have done against your record relative to the average top 25 team. Clemson is 3rd ahead of the other 2. The strength of schedule, Clemson's significantly better. Top 25 wins. And in fact, if you go by FPI and go into the top 40, Clemson has 6 wins against the top 40 of the FPI. That is that's more than anybody. And, of course, the loss to Syracuse, the only blemish on their resume.